Well, good evening to you and welcome to this program of Walter and Groundings. I'm your host, Dion Abrams, and with me on the program this evening is the popular Professor Dr. David Hines, and June 13 will be tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so we're looking at Walter Rodney and the date of his death in 1980 and the 13th of June. But before we talk about Walter, we are in troubling times. Young Quindon Bacchus, another young African Guyanese, has been assassinated by the police. In reference to Walter and those times, I want to begin by asking, before we look at, because it's something that we have to look at, how do we factor that new situation into this Guyanese political sphere as we now live it?
Well, I think there is resonance of Walter in that, in the sense that 42 years after Walter's assassination, we still have to unlock Walter from the narrow cocoon that some people have buried in it. Some people give the impression that Walter was fighting PNC, and that he was fighting for Indian Guyanese, and nothing could be further from the truth. Walter was fighting against a dictatorship. He was fighting to unshackle Guyana from dictatorship. The PNC was the party that was presiding over dictatorship at that time. But Walter was concerned not so much with the PNC, he was concerned with the removal of dictatorship. And in his book, People's Power, No Dictatorship, he outlined how a dictatorship is created and what a dictatorship looks like. And so therefore, a dictatorship could be in 1980. That same dictatorship can show its head in 2022, as it has done. And so the whole question of extrajudicial killing is a function or a consequence of dictatorial rule. And so therefore there is a relationship between Walter Rodney's anti-dictatorial struggle and our struggle today to deal with this dictatorial regime that uses extrajudicial killing as one of its weapons against resistance and one of its instruments of domination and dictatorship. The point I'm making is that Walter Rodney led the struggle against the dictatorship of that time. That dictatorship came to an end in 1992, that phase of the dictatorship. One would have thought that the end of dictatorial rule would lead to democracy. It didn't. It moved from the authoritarian state to the criminalized state. And now that criminalized state is now morphed into another autocratic state. So the obscenities that Walter Rodney and the rest of us fought against 40 odd years ago, those obscenities have now reappeared. And so therefore we are right back, in a sense we've come full circle in 42 years. And so the relevance of Walter Rodney today, I am arguing, is not so much what Walter would have done had he lived, is whether what Walter Rodney fought for and what was dismantled in 1992 has now come full circle back to a Guyana that did not heed the lessons of dictatorship. And because we exchange one party for the other. Because that's what we ended up doing in 1992. We exchanged the PNC for the PPP with the assumption that the end of authoritarianism leads to democracy, and the PPP has used the mask of democracy to continue and to what? To elaborate on the authoritarian state that they met. The state under Walter Rodney, against which Walter Rodney fought, was killing young black men and women and young people. The state that succeeded, that state has now made police brutality into a policy of extrajudicial killing. There was police brutality under the PNC. Police was killing young people back then. They've always killed young black people. Colonial times, under the PNC. What we have seen under the PPP is where that killing of young black men has now become part of policy under the PPP, whereby the PPP is into the business of driving fear in the African Guyanese community, coercing that community to know its place. And part of that is the extrajudicial killing. So it's now part of the dominance, the agenda of dominance. It has now become politically institutionalized. That's the difference from back then to now.
What are the lessons of dictatorship that we seem to have missed?
One of the lessons of dictatorship is that we seem to have missed is the fact that a dictatorship can function with a mask. That they can use democracy.
Like at the president's speech at the OAS?
That's right. Use that democracy as a mask to carry out authoritarian regime. One of the other things that we missed, and that is that dictatorship is not only personalized dictatorship. People will say Burnham was a dictator. Bingo. The rest of the PNC were just going along with Burnham. One of the big lessons that we have learned there is that there can be a collective dictatorship. So it's not a one-person dictatorship. Alright? They can be collective. The way in which Mr. Jagdio hides behind Irfan Ali, when everybody knows from everything that we've seen that he is the de facto president. Alright? And so what he does is that Irfan Ali and Donald Ramatar and so on were there as the fronts while he was controlling the power from behind. That's another lesson that we've learned. And perhaps we have not learned in the sense that we didn't anticipate that. Perhaps the biggest lesson that we have learned is the relationship between ethnicity and dictatorship.
And dominance.
And dominance. Yeah. The way in which the party plays on the ethnic fears of the people and use that as a means of instilling dictatorship in their name. Alright? So Indian Guyanese support the PPP for ethnic reasons. The PPP takes that support, alright, and builds up this domination of the society. Alright? In a sense, it's pimping its own supporters in pursuit of the authoritarian state. Right? And so therefore, the authoritarian state serves the function of denial of civil rights and civil liberties, civil rights in the case of Ashamed Bollers, right? Whose right to enjoy protection against racism has been stripped. Not the DPP, not the police, not the government is protecting our right not to be the victim of racism. our civil rights have been eroded. The function of the government is to protect civil rights, to protect Ashoned Ballers from being spat upon because of our race, to protect Ashoned Ballers from being called a monkey. That's the function of the state. Protection. The state doesn't give you rights. What the state does is protect your rights. And the fact that the police has not moved against the accused, the government has not stepped in, the DPP has not moved, it means that the government is violating that young lady's civil rights.
The DPP moved.
No, the DPP moves in the other direction, as people say.
Right, yeah.
The DPP moves sideways. Right. And so you find the government doing that. Now, in terms of civil liberties, the right to free speech, the right to life, those are liberties. Again, the government doesn't give those liberties, but the government has a right to uphold those liberties. Mr. Oren Boston, his right to life was sidestepped and removed. Right? The right to free speech. Mr. The Affairs Minister says that if you say anything,
you can be arrested.
He will arrest you. So he's saying your right to free speech depends on how he feels. He determines what is free speech. Right? The right to association. If you associate with a political party or so on, you can get into trouble. So we've seen this erosion of civil rights and civil liberties in a systematic way that we've not seen since independence. Now, and this includes the PNC period, when of course we know that it was an authoritarian regime, right? But because we did not go for the removal of the regime in 1992, what we did was remove a party. We didn't do anything about the Constitution. We didn't do anything about the enormous powers of the government and the state. We basically removed and said the PNC are bad boys. And the assumption is the PPP would be good boys. And Jagan used to say that. He said nothing is wrong with the Constitution. It's the PNC. It's who. Right. And so we made that big mistake of not removing the authoritarian regime. Remove the party. And we put another party, and that party used the mask of democracy in creating a more dangerous dictatorship.
Now the WPA and Rodney, in their struggle, you always talk about Arnold Rampersad and so on. In the context of today's, like Shannon Ballers and so on, how is there any similarity in those incidents, and what are the responses that you can differentiate?
Well, Arnold Rampersad was a PPP member. The government tried to they charged him and tried to prosecute him for an alleged crime. Alright? And it was felt at a time when the society, the 1970s, the society was a little bit more open than it is today to the whole notion of ethnic unity. Right? And so therefore it was easy to make the case to them that part of what the government was trying to do was to give Arnold Rampersad a raw deal because he belonged to the PPP and because he was Indian. Right? And so therefore it was easier for Rodney and Kwayana and so on to go into Indian areas and lend solidarity to them. Alright? And Indians also came over into the black communities in those days to lend solidarity. So we had an instance there of ethnic unity. What is different today? Indian Guyanese leaders, whether they're in government, whether they're in civil society, they have not even condemned what has happened to Shannon Ballers. In the 70s, we did more than condemn. We went over and lent active solidarity. Today, you are not going to find Indian leaders, non-governmental leaders, even condemning what happened to Shannon Ballers.
Not even the religious...
Not even the religious communities. So in that sense, the society today is less open to ethnic solidarity than it was 40 years ago. In that sense, one has to say that Walter Rodney and the WPA of that time created almost a miracle. Because it's difficult in these societies to get the ethnic groups to come together. At least at the level of confronting dictatorship. Rodney and the WPA were able to do it. And I'm saying Rodney and the WPA because Rodney died. He was killed, he was murdered, he was assassinated in 1980. But the Rodneyite principle and the Rodneyite praxis continued after Walter Rodney, contrary to what they will tell you, oh, WPA died when Walter Rodney. No, the struggle against the dictatorship was intensified after Rodney died. And as the WPA said in its statement that is put out today, that the 1992 movement, the fingerprints and the footprints of Walter Rodney are indelibly marked on there. It was Walter Rodney's victory in 1992. As Dr. King would have said, I've been to the mountaintop, I've seen the promised land, I may not get there with you, but you, my people, will get there. And we got there with Walter Rodney's praxis. There are people today who are shouting about who betrayed who and who betrayed, were hiding. Those were dangerous times. Right? You came up as a young man in the latter part of the 1980s when it was still dangerous. And these people were hiding. They talk about betrayal. People who stood with Walter Rodney on the front lines, gave up their liberty, right? They were 18 and 19-year-olds going to prison for standing Walter Rodney. I know that well because I was one of them, right? There are people whose lives were snuffed out. There are people whose families were denied employment and all of that stuff for standing with Walter Rodney. We did not betray Walter Rodney when we were needed most, and that is on the front lines. And so when you hear people spout all that nonsense today, what they are doing is trying to claim Rodney as validation for their narrow agendas, when Rodney was much broader than that.
Yeah, but you talked about the fact that the ethnic cleavage could have been realized during the period of Rodney. There are those who today argue that it only happened because Barnum was black. How would you respond to that? What we are seeing is the fact that the nature of the Indians has always been one that...
It's a valid point. Indians would have more naturally joined the anti-dictatorial movement because the government was a black government. Right? The miracle was getting African Guyanese who played an equally major role in the anti-dictatorial movement. In fact, it was African Guyanese in Linden, in Buxton, who were the spearhead of the Walter Rodney movement. And to get black people who voted for the PNC but recognize that the PNC was moving in an authoritarian direction and were prepared to stand up against their own party. So it was the miracle of black people, black Guyanese standing up against their party, and Indians who were brave enough to leave the ranks of the PPP and come over to the WPA. So yes, it was easier for Indians, but you see they did more than just speak. A lot of them left the PPP, came over the WPA. Of course, the logic of free and fair elections drove them back over there in 1992.
All right, so we're looking at the Quinlan Bacchus, and we're talking about that as a current situation and factoring Rodney into the current sphere of things. What I would like to say, you were saying that the state is using the police as a weapon of fear and so on. Well, there is a more sinister plot that I'm seeing evolving, because this youngster was a former member of the Guyanese Defense Force.
Yes.
I have a cousin from Buxton who had a similar experience, but he wasn't killed. He was approached by a special agent from the police and posing as a businessman and telling him that he has a farm up the Mahaika Creek and all of that, and he was interested in him working for him and so on. And then he related to me that the man showed him an AK-47 and asked him if he could use these guns and so on, if he knew anything about them. He said he didn't know about them. He told him he didn't have knowledge. And then he began to expose to him other kinds of weapons in pictures and so on. And then he told him that he would get him the job and he would take him up to the creek and all of these things. But what eventually turned out that one night he said, okay, I'm ready to take you up. Meet me at the gas station. I'm going to give you, because he said, man, if I'm going, I can't just leave my family like that. I got to get some money to leave with them. He said, I'm going to give you some money and so on. But meet me by the gas station. And when he went there, he related to me that the guy, another fellow came in a car and showed him some money and said, man, come in the front seat, I'm coming. He said, man, if you're giving me the money, why do I have to come in the seat? He said, man, come in the car. He refused. And he decided not to go into the front seat, but he went behind it right in the back seat. And as soon as he sat down, some vehicles swarmed that vehicle that he was in. There were a set of men with guns and so on. They dragged him out and then they took him away and so on. They tried to get him to confess to things that he didn't know about and all of that. But he too was ex-military. Unfortunately, because it was in a public sphere, possibly was not killed, but they had in the vehicle ammunition and so on, which they would have claimed that he had and would have killed him in that instance. Luckily, he did not sit where there was ammunition, but they claimed that he had it. They're still making a claim that he had it in a juice box.
Yeah.
All right. So it seems as though there is now a move.
Yes.
To target
young former military
yes. black men in communities and to eliminate them. Right?
Yeah.
And so we have to now warn these youngsters who have left the force that when these guys come to them, all right, with any kind of proposition, that they have to be wary and tell them no immediately. There's a video circulating now on Facebook where the guy was clearly running away from the police.
Yeah.
All right. Clearly running, and you heard no small arm fire.
Yeah.
All you heard was this barrage of heavy artillery against a youngster who is running because he went to the car and then he turned and he ran. And obviously all those bullets went into his rear, his back in service. You know, but the concern for me is the bullet to his head, which points directly to assassination.
Yeah.
All right. And I mean, how you're talking now about Rodney, dictatorship, and a state that is now fashioning, you know, a time that is perilous and dangerous, and that requires the presence of the likes of Rodney and Quine and so on. How do we deal with this?
But we have to deal with it. We have to take the Rodneyite principles, the ordinary practices, and put them into play. You see, there is the forces are varied and complex. All right. The state is merged with the criminal enterprise, and sometimes you don't know what you're confronting. Whether you're confronting the criminal enterprise, whether you're confronting the state. You see what you recounted there just now. You know, it's a case where the state is using agents to lure these boys and then set them up, and then the state comes in and criminalize them. Now they're playing on a couple of things. First of all, the government know how far it is going. It knows how far it has gone. They're not stupid. They know that human beings, forget about political parties for now, human beings naturally would not tolerate that kind of, meaning that the way they're pushing the society, it is unsustainable. And that sooner or later, they will have to deal with an upsurge in the society. So what they are doing, all right, is they are neutralizing young black men who have military capabilities. Go back to 2002. They have not forgotten that.
That's why.
Right? So they are neutralizing. They are playing on the fact that young black people, and I hope they're not in the majority, but I think there's a critical mass, who are lured by money. Part of it has to do with poverty, part of it has to do with materialism, part of it has to do with lack of racial consciousness and political consciousness. And so this need for quick money on the part of young people in general, but young black people, they're now playing on that. I can take you here, I can give you a gun, I can give you money, I can give you. So they're playing on that, all right, as a means of neutralizing the young black men in the society. And finally, they're doing it because they are allowed to do it, frankly. Our black communities are not putting up barriers, meaning we're not talking to our young people and giving them the knowledge. And young people say, I depend on that and we believe we can. Rather than keep working on them, keep working, these young men have to come home to their girlfriends and their wives and their children and their mothers and their fathers, and all of us have to talk to them about the danger that they are in and that they are exposed to. We have to continue to do that kind of work. But the other thing is that we are a leaderless society. Our people respond to leaders, and they give leaders the leeway to lead them, right? Unfortunately for African Guyanese, we have one big overarching political institution, and that is the PNC. And when the PNC doesn't get it right, when the PNC loses capacity, we are in trouble. We are packed because the PNC has not ceded space to other organizations. Now we're in Buxton, so we are okay. But if you're WP and you go to Victoria or Golden Grove, there's a way in which the PNC elements in the village force you out. Don't come here. This is PNC territory. Right? So except for a place like Buxton, you know, where I guess the PNC doesn't fight the WP and so on. When you go to those other communities, the PNC leadership doesn't have to tell them. In the communities, they start to kind of claim the territory. What David Hines and WPA coming here for. So what happens is now the PNC is immobilized because of the manner in which they've used power. They're divided, they're immobilized, and so on. Black people are immobilized. Now, what's the lesson? What's the Rodney lesson there? Self-activity.
Okay.
That is, that as people, we have to learn. We have to learn that we have to engage in mobilization as people. Mobilization as community. Nothing is wrong with mobilizing for the party and under the party, but that cannot be your only form of mobilization. Walter Rodney talked about self-activity, self-mobilization for self-freedom, self-emancipation as he called it. Right? And so therefore, what we can take from Rodney into this period is to preach to communities, as we are doing here tonight, that as communities you need to organize. The people of Islington shouldn't be waiting on leaders to come in and tell them what to do when one of their sons, you know, is murdered like that. He's from Haslington, right? Golden Grove. You know, the community has to engage in its own mobilization. It's now the warriors are at the door, and we have to put up shutters, barricades, from getting them to penetrate our communities, and first of all seek to compromise our young people and then eliminate them. Now once you eliminate one or two or three, you know what you're hoping that will happen. The others will quote unquote stand down, as they say in the military. It's really serious times, but I'm saying we have the tools, meaning our society confronted dictatorship before, and I would say we did that successfully. There were some major casualties. Walter Rodney was assassinated and so on and so forth. But there are lessons we can learn that organizations, parties like ours, who would have helped to build an anti-dictatorial movement. We know something about how you confront dictatorship. That there should be space for us to deal with our communities and to alert them to the threat of dictatorship and the modern threat of dictatorship.
No, I heard on Kidaki's program, I think you were there one morning, that one guy was saying that he called in and he was making the point that, you know, these things are happening and there is no pushback, and that the government, like you said, is using black people to be part of their nastiness, all right, selecting them to put them in positions where they have influence, and so other black people who may be of a different mind are somehow subjugated and so on. And he was suggesting that, you know, they need a South African treatment. I remember. Now, in Guyana here, our own experience to that South African treatment during the 2002 period was shoot get shoot back. How far away down the road are we from that kind of reality?
Well, I hope we're not. I hope we're far away down the road. Unfortunately, we may be there already. Now, okay. So if you have been in struggle for 30, 40 odd years as we've been, you've seen it all. You've seen the bloodletting. You've seen the chaos in the society. If you've studied South Africa, you've studied other ethnically divided societies, you say you don't want Guyana to go there. You want people to stand up erect and to fight back, but you don't want to go there, so you got to walk that thin line, right? And I think that's where we are at the moment. Now, sometimes I sit back and I let the people talk. As I think they're saying that we are inciting people. I think it's the other way around. I think the people on the ground, the families of that young man who was shot, the family of Orenba, they have a right to want the South African treatment. Alright? And in a sense, they are the ones who are telling us you all are too weak, you all are too soft, and so on. And so we have to have this constant conversation with our people. Alright? To encourage their righteous indignation, but discourage chaos, discourage the kind of confusion where the gun rules the tongue, you know. And it's a delicate undertaking. You have to confront it every day in a village that is constantly telling us you all gotta get going. So, but as political people, we have to, and they don't give us credit for it. They don't give us. Dion Abrams and David Hines and them, they're inciting violence. And they're inciting race. If they know how we got to hold back people, they will give us Nobel Peace Prizes.
I am beyond holding back people. I mean, with these events that are taking place nowadays, right? And sometimes you and I get a different perspective on that. But I think I have reached a point, particularly after this incident, knowing the agenda of the PPP, that people must be given their chance to express themselves and to let the authority know that we have reached a point where enough is enough. I think what the PPP is doing, and look at what we've done to the parliamentarians. You're saying that they're pushing it and they're pushing it and they're pushing it, all right? And there seemed to be no end to where they're going, all right? The extent to which they are willing to push back black people against the wall. How much more are we to take?
Well, look, as I always say, one cannot direct the struggle and direct people. One can inform the struggle, one can mobilize. Walter Rodney would say, when all doors are closed, people will find ways to liberate themselves, right? And I hold very strongly to that principle. I believe that we have to do the heavy lifting, the dangerous work. Because the work we are doing is dangerous work, because they can take our words of caution and use them as words of incitement. So it's dangerous work. Like I said, we have to walk that thin line. I am very certain this cannot be sustained. I am very certain this cannot be sustained. The most we can do is continue to tell people they're human beings.
Okay.
And they ought not to allow themselves to be subjugated in the way they're being subjugated. No, they must fight back. They must fight back. They must fight back. And I think the tenor of that fighting will be determined by those who have the power. They often, by their action, determine what the reaction of the people will be. And I will leave it at that.
What I'm concerned about, Ben, I mean, when he was appointed the Minister of Home Affairs, Owen and I on this program said that they're putting an ignoramus to become the Minister of Home Affairs so that they know that he's temperamental. And that, I mean, his actions, because he's black, may seem in some way to them, it can be justified as, well, look, this is not an Indian doing these things. And information that I've received is that, apart from his threat to people who want to speak freely about, is that there are lots of concerns about him inserting himself into the agencies that are supposedly under his command. I mean, I saw the man at the fire on Sheriff Street actually telling the people, bring this, bring that. I don't know where he got the fire training experience. All right? I mean, for me, it was laughable and absolutely ridiculous that these are the people who have the skill and know what needs to be done. He is a minister who has no training in firefighting, and he is going to direct them to tell them what to do. But I subsequently learned that whether a fire is 2 or 3 in the morning, good for him, that he's there and he's doing the same thing at all the fires. To the point where one fireman said, listen, Chief, I'm the expert here. You understand? And put him to his place. But others are not willing to do that.
It is that he's been a proactive minister. But the larger significance of what you're talking about there is the fact that he's an enforcer. He sees himself as an enforcer, and the image of the black enforcer, whether in South Africa or Haiti or here in Guyana, is very much part of the praxis of regimes that are into ethnic dominance and racial dominance, and they're always black men and increasingly women who are prepared to play those roles, who are who see the world through power. All right, and they convince themselves that the world is a colorblind world, and that what they are doing is wielding power over recalcitrant people. These are people who would have concluded that black people are no good. They would have concluded that black people are no good.
Black man you're talking about?
Yes. There are lots of
How is that
men.
possible? How is that possible?
Well, that I'm a black man. I have escaped the ghetto through my hard work. The rest of them are a bunch of lazy, good for nothing, and the way they become real citizens, you have to be them. There are people who believe that for black people to act in a real way, you've got to be them. See, the whites at the time of emancipation felt that black people could not exist in a state of freedom. That you had to be them, you had to control them for them to be in line. And there are black people who were trained in white institutions, right? Who developed that notion of what black people are and feel that the only way you can get black people in line is to be them in line. And often they find themselves in parties like the PPP. And the PPP give them the leeway to put black people in line. You know, it's you know, Malcolm X and Franz Fanon and then refer to it as self-hate and so on and so forth. But it's a streak that has been historically part of the black experience.
So we are in 2022, all right, and race continues to raise its head. Walter Rodney's view on race and class, all right, suggested that, you know, there was a convergence of those two.
Yes.
All right, but how does that, I mean, if we look at Guyana's society today, Walter's view on race and class, in its, because we had a situation where apart from the lumpen elements, you had a fusion of the middle class with the lumpen elements fighting against that dictatorship that was prominent of the day. But there is no such thing happening today. How does that idea of Walter?
And this is the point. I think that we get into trouble with some of the people mouthing off about Rodney.
Yeah.
First of all, for them, Walter Rodney stuck at 1980. Right? And they're trying to tell us, look what Walter Rodney did between 74 and 80. You all, as descendants of Rodney, must do that forever and forevermore, no matter how the world change, no matter how we change, no matter what, you all must not change. And so they stick Walter Rodney at 1980. I am very sure, one thing I'm sure of, is that if Walter Rodney had lived to today, 42 years later, he would have taken a fresh look at Guyana. He would not have been using the praxis of 42 years ago in a willy-nilly way to deal with what's happening now. He was a concretist. When Walter Rodney was in Jamaica, and 95%, 96% black people, he was dealing with the question of black power. He said, if you use my race to dehumanize me, I will use my race to humanize myself. There can be no stronger statement of black power than that. That I would rather talk about class, I would rather talk about other things. I did not make myself black. I was made black through the institution of slavery, and he went on and things. When he moved to Tanzania, alright, another black society, independent society, he used a class analysis, right? Because he was dealing with an all-black society in which the question of independence, where that independence was going, was being debated. And he used a class analysis when he came to Guyana. Guyana and Ascria had fought the black power struggle. and in some senses had pulled Guyana and the Caribbean society towards recognizing blackness as an integral part of things. So Rodney didn't have to come here to fight black power, right? Quine and them had done it here in Guyana. Geddes Granger, McCandle Duggan, them had done it in Trinidad. Tilect and them had done it in Antigua. So Rodney came back to the Caribbean, and he came to Guyana in which the issue of black power was no longer the central issue. The central issue was the issue of the society moving swiftly down to dictatorship. And so therefore, in order to confront a dictatorship, you couldn't use race to confront the dictatorship. He therefore reached for the class analysis. Alright? So Rodney was a concretist. Guyana, as the dynamics in Guyana have changed since he was there, and the one thing I'm certain of is that he would have taken a fresh look at Guyana, make an analysis of where Guyana was, and then act accordingly. That Rodney was not going to, like a little boy who learns something and keeps it in his head and doesn't learn anything else, say, this is what I used in 1974 and I want to use it now.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's one thing I'm certain of. But your substantive question is the question of the race and class. I would say, as someone who followed Rodney and now in my academic thing studied Rodney, Rodney never reconciled the synthesis of race and class. Nobody has done it. Not C.L.R. James, not Walter Rodney, not Frantz Fanon. What they were able to do is to bring the two together, race and class, alright? But in terms of the smooth synthesis, they never reconciled it. And that is left for the rest of us, right? And we are having difficulty in dealing with the question of race and class, and now we have gender. You know, how do you fuse race, class, and gender into a neat package and analyze it? It's very difficult. How are you going to go and tell the mother, the parents of that young man who was killed, that he was killed because he's working class? He's working class. But our experience in Ghana tells us he was not killed because he's working class. You see? And so therefore, the challenge that Rodney faces, the challenge that we still face, is how to synthesize race, class, and gender and put them to work in the society. There's a way in which when you put that package behind the society pushes away class, it pushes away gender, and it highlights race. What do you, as a theorist and a leader, do? Impose on the society? Walter Rodney himself said in 1970, he said one has to fight for one's racial identity today so that tomorrow you don't have to fight for it anymore. Now the question is, Walter Rodney did not live long enough to see how Guyana synthesized race and class in the 70s and the 80s. And then once elections came around, race and class, when they separate ways. Had he been confronted with a post-1992 situation, he would have had to take another look at his praxis. I don't think he would have abandoned class. He would not have, you know. But he would have had to look at the society. What people forget is that Walter Rodney came back in 1974. And he spent time getting used to this society. He didn't come and impose panAfricanism and impose this. He went into the communities and did painful work and then came to his conclusion about what was the best practice for that moment.
But we talk about, alright, so there is a view also, and it prevails because of what is happening in the society today, that Rodney, you said he was fighting a dictatorship.
Yeah.
Did I ask you the question that he had no right to challenge Barnum because Barnum understood Javan and the PPP better than we did. And this is what is happening now.
No, you're saying that as a fact, or you're saying that some people are claiming that?
People are claiming
yes,
that.
Right.
That this is confirmation of the view that Burnham had, the vision that he had, and understood that we did not. How do you respond to that?
No, I don't share that. Burnham was fighting for multiracialism too.
Okay.
Burnham went to the West Coast and told black people turn the other cheek. That's how your leader, Mr. Quayana, became the racist, because Mr. Quayana tell black people, well, if you're being attacked, you have to fight back. Burnham never tell them that, People put things in Burnham mouth long after. Burnham said turn the other cheek because Burnham saw power coming. And so Burnham wanted that racial thing to be over with very quickly. Alright? Remember, it's Burnham who talked about one people, one nation, one destiny. So Burnham was also, despite his knowledge of the sociology of East Indians, he also, like Rodney, like Guyana, like all the black leaders who wanted a Guyana together, he also felt that you couldn't be that, militant black. And that is why in the PNC today, now they don't have the dexterity of a Burnham, right? And they go around that they got to win crossover vote and all kind of thing. The PNC has really never come to grips with the question of race. They never did. And it started on the Burnham. No, Burnham was in an era in which Burnham understood race better than the leaders in the PNC today. That I will grant. Burnham understood race better. Rodney understood race. Quayana, I think, understood race more than all of them. Alright? But if you're living in a multi-ethnic society, you have to decide whether, as in 1961, Quayana and Asbury says, we first of all have to shave power. And if we can't shave power, then we split up. Alright? No, and even in that proposal, Quayana had what you call people want to live in an Indian state, live in one state. People want to live as black people and what he call a free zone for Indians and Africans who want to live together. The partition wasn't just two-way that they put us as a last resort, it was three-way. Alright? So a no-leader, no matter how much they understood race, once you wanted Guyana to work, you had to reach for multiracialism. And Rodney reached multiracialism. He reached for a dictatorship, to fight against a dictatorship. And in that means that he had to confront black people, black people. Right? Now, again I say, 40 years later we can look back at that time and say, well, Rodney should not have confronted Burnham. Alright, he should not have done this and he should not have done that, and we can theorize about it. We can think. To this day, PNC supporters still beat me over the head, saying the PPP of today is we make it possible because we fight down Burnham and so on. Those are the risks you take, right? When you're engaged in a difficult situation. All of us supported Mr. Granger as leader of the PNC and the coalition because we felt that, given his own history, that he was the best person. As it turned out, he made a meal of what was given to him, right? He was given the opportunity to make real what Burnham couldn't do, what Rodney couldn't do back then. He was given the opportunity to take that thing to another level, and he didn't. The coalition is today broken up. It was a stepping stone to this society that we're talking about, the multi-ethnic society. Small population left the PPP with Nagamoto, go to the AFC. The AFC came along with the APNU, by which time, the black community had made peace. The radical forces, the party, the PNC. And Mr. Granger was given that. He was given that. Some Indians, some other Indians, a united black community. I'm not saying he could have created the unified Guyana that we want, the one people want, but he could have taken it another level if he had an understanding of the historical dynamics, that 2015 government was not a government, what have been to say recently, business as usual. It was not a government of business as usual. It was a government that was given a gift that no other leader, Bonham never had that in his hand. He never had a united black community, right? Because first of all, you had Guyana threatening with Ascra, then later on Rodney and the Double P and so on. He never had a united black community. Granger had that. The Guyana Rodney Alliance came together with the PNC and formed the APNU. He had what Burnham or Hoyt didn't have, or Corbin. Alright? Alright? He had a set of Indians who genuinely left the PPP. They didn't come to the PNC, but they went to what they thought was a small Indian party. And he had that in his hand. Right? So, I'm saying the unfinished job of Rodney, and PNC will argue Burnham and so on. I mean, we have to finish that job.
All right.
Right? We have to finish that job. And like I said, we entrusted Mr. Granger with the leadership of that process. And unfortunately, you know, I mean, it's easy to say he made a mess of it, but all of us have to take responsibility. We made a mess of it under his leadership.
So time is, the light is on us. So yeah. We talked about Burnham and One People, One Nation, One Destiny, and that this very idea of One People, One Nation was given to Granger. He squandered it and so on. And now the PPP is talking about One Guyana. How this One Guyana concept in the face of what is happening, is it, what really is it?
It's a mask. One People, One Nation, One Destiny was genuine. Burnham was genuine. He believed he could do it.
Okay.
Guyana believed he could do it. Rodney believed he could do it. Multiracialism is the same thing. One People, One. They were genuine. They believed they could do it. These here know they can't do it. So what they've done is create a mask called One Guyana to shut we eye while they plunder Guyana. And when we open we eye, the One Guyana is One PPP Guyana. And the implications of that. So that is, it's not even a slogan. Mm-hmm. It's a con work. It's a mask, right? Give Burnham and Rodney and them credit. When they talk about multiracialism, Rodney meant it. When Burnham talked about One People, One Nation, One Destiny, he meant it genuinely. Genuinely. The mistake is that he didn't realize a black man can't force East Indians to come. You can't have One People, One Nation, One Destiny with one race in charge. That we know don't work. Alright? Rodney had the good fortune, like Granger, and he made the most of it. The good fortune that there were enough East Indians who felt that this black man was not threatening to us. And so Rodney could do a little bit more with multiracialism than others could do. Alright? He didn't live long enough for us to see the logic. Would they have voted for him in 1992? We don't know. We don't know. From the little that we have seen since then, they might not have. Alright? But Granger had it electorally. You see, Rodney had it in struggle in the streets. He didn't have institutional power. What Rodney fought for on the streets, Granger got institutionally. History doesn't lie.
Alright, in closing, I want to deal, how do we, I'm going back to it, because we have to deal with this new agenda that the PPP has. What are you going to say again to the black people out there, with the young men, particularly the former army people whom they are now targeting? to assassinate and so on young black men in the villages and so on.
Well, there's not much more I can say, you can say than we have been saying. We just have to ask the black community to be more open, to a certain kind of consciousness. And they have to put pressure on the PNC to free up space. You see, under Burnham, you had Askra. And Askra had space. Askra used to call strikes in London. Askra used to do all kinds of things because Askra had space. The present PNC doesn't give us space to do the kind of work that the PNC cannot do and will not do. The PNC is an electoral machine that is always thinking about elections. It is not equipped and prepared to fight the human rights struggle of black people. The struggle for black people, human rights and civil liberty and civil rights. The PNC never told us that they are in the business of that. So they have to free up space for those of us who are prepared to lead that fight. They have to give us space for it. If they don't, when we go into the communities, the people will feel they have to make a choice between us and the PNC. And we can't continue to put our people in that position. We need electoral politics. I'm not saying that we shouldn't fight elections and try to win elections, but we ought, at this point, we need to stop the bloodletting in our community. We need to do that. We need to stop the impasse.
Alright, so we need to put up a resistance, as the famous musician would say, right?
Yeah, putting up resistance.
Right. So folks, we've got to take a stand against all that is happening. I mean, we are being beaten back. When we come next time, we'll talk about the agenda to keep black people in poverty. I mean, all of the farming communities of the Red Project have been abandoned, you know, I mean, and they're trying to push them back to exactly where they were prior to the intervention of that period. And the thing is, they got a few black people in some of the villages. They went in there, formed some groups, giving them a little bit of fertilizer, but they're not seeing the bigger picture of the agenda of the PPP.
No. But we that's our job. Yeah. There was a time when I didn't see the agenda, you didn't see the agenda, but we had somebody, and some people who raised us. We were raised politically, and we now have to raise them politically. You see, the individual, first of all, looks out for individual interests. And it is the Rodneys and others who have to bring the consciousness to them how those individual interests are integrally linked to the collective interest. That's usually the task. A good leader is able to do that. The man wake up in the morning, the lady wake up in the morning, we're going to cook today. Not which government in power. The first thing is we're going to cook today. We are going to put in the children lunch thing, you know, and so on. And we have to make them conscious, help to make them conscious of the linkage between that and the higher power.
All right, Dr. Hines, I want to thank you for being on the program, and
tomorrow we are at
the National Library.
The National Library. We are having a forum there.
Yes.
I know the COVID is still in play, but those of you who feel safe enough to come out at the National Library at 5 p.m. we're having a Walter Rodney symposium on the issue of attacking poverty. The WPS selected poverty as one of the areas that we are going to fight for in this era of oil and gas. There are others who are doing work in other areas, but we feel that this question of poverty, persistent poverty, has to be broken. And so therefore we are revisiting the Buxton proposal that Professor Clive Thomas made in 2018 at Buxton. 4 years later, we are looking at attacking poverty. How does a universal basic income, how does that, along with cash transfers, how can we break the back of poverty? So we're going to spend Walter Rodney's anniversary discussing that. So it's 5 o'clock, National Library.
Tomorrow,
June 13th. It will be streamed on Facebook and YouTube and Camps TV. So those of you who are not near Georgetown, you can follow it on Camps TV. The wonders of technology these days. And those of you who are near Georgetown, you can come to the National Library and you will be live. Professor Clive Thomas, the main presenter.
Permit me, operator, to let the viewers know that in honor of the memory of Professor Joycelyn Lunk, every year the Pan-African movement would have had the Day of the African Child concert at Queen's College.
Yes.
Now that undertaking is now taken up by Sister Penda Diane and the reparations movement. And so on the 19th, that's Father's Day.
Next week Sunday.
Yeah. At 2 o'clock, the concert will be on at Queen's College. I think tickets are $500, I think, in the auditorium of the so we were asking you to support that activity in honor of the memory. They just felt that the need to carry on.
Yes, carry on. Yes,
that
we have to do that.
So, Day of the African Child concert, Sunday 19 June at Queen's College Auditorium. It starts at 2 p.m. Just see and be there. If you're not going to be there, support by purchasing a few tickets. Thank you very much. Do have a good night. See you next week, same time, same channel, for another program of Walter Rodney Groundings. Good night.
Planning a cleanup? We can help. Sevon's Waste Management skip bins can be provided for home renovation projects, yard cleanups, or construction sites. It's simple. Step 1, just pick up the phone and give us a call. Step 2,